The war ended when the human princess spoke. The station was enormous, like a city floating in the void, with docking bays stretching out in all directions. Ships from countless alien civilizations shone like stars against the black background of space. She had seen pictures, of course, but seeing it in reality made her feel small, almost fragile. And yet, she knew that she carried a responsibility heavier than any starship. For centuries, the galaxy had been at war. Alien empires, coalitions, and factions had fought for territory, resources, and influence. Humans, comparatively new to interstellar society, were considered weak, naive, and inexperienced. The idea that a human princess could negotiate peace seemed absurd to many. But Princess Alara had something that no weapon or technology could provide: insight, patience, and a mind willing to listen. The docking bay doors opened, and the ship was guided in by magnetic tethers. Alara watched as crews of various species moved with practiced precision. There were tall, spindly beings with translucent skin, their bodies shimmering with bioluminescence. There were round, sturdy creatures with thick armor-like hides. Some moved on multiple limbs, others floated using personal anti-gravity devices. All of them looked at her with curiosity, whispering to each other, their voices strange but melodic in the ship's communication system. Alara adjusted the hem of her ceremonial robe and took a deep breath. Today was her first step as the human representative to the Galactic Peace Summit. She had spent weeks preparing, not with speeches or threats, but by reading, observing, and learning everything she could about the factions that were coming. Every gesture, every nuance mattered. Humans might be underestimated, but she would turn that underestimation into her strength. As she stepped onto the docking platform, a tall, crystalline being greeted her. Its body refracted light like a prism, creating small rainbows across the floor. "Princess Alara of Earth," it said in a voice that was both musical and formal. "Welcome to the summit station." "Thank you," she replied politely, bowing slightly. Her tone was calm, steady. She knew that aliens respected decorum and precision. Even a slight misstep could be taken as an insult. The being led her through long corridors that curved and shifted with the station's rotation. Panels along the walls displayed the stars outside, showing the positions of ships approaching and leaving. In these corridors, she saw other delegates arriving. Some were stern, their eyes cold and calculating. Others smiled politely but with the faint air of suspicion. Every glance she received reminded her of the galaxy's long history of mistrust. Finally, she arrived at the central chamber where the summit would be held. It was a vast circular room, high ceilings arching overhead with transparent panels that showed the stars beyond. The room already buzzed with activity. Delegates from dozens of species moved in clusters, speaking in languages she didn't recognize. The air smelled faintly of metallic ozone, mixed with other scents that were impossible to describe. Alara walked in carefully, keeping her posture straight but relaxed. She noticed a council of alien leaders already seated on elevated platforms. Their expressions ranged from skepticism to mild amusement. Humans were, after all, the youngest species in the coalition, and their presence here was unprecedented. A voice echoed through the chamber in a universally translated tone. "We gather here today to discuss terms of peace after cycles of conflict. Let all representatives be heard with respect and fairness." Alara took her place among the human delegation. Though she was young, her calm presence seemed to stand out among the crowd. Her assistant whispered a reminder: "Observe first, speak later." She nodded. Listening would be her greatest weapon. The first sessions were formal and ceremonial. Leaders introduced themselves, exchanged pleasantries, and recited historical grievances. The words were heavy, full of centuries of misunderstanding and anger, but Alara noticed patterns that others might have missed. Some factions were rivals because of resource scarcity, others because of pride or fear. Every argument was layered. But underneath it all, the same basic truth appeared again and again. The war had continued not because of hate, but because of inability to communicate effectively. During a break, Ilara wandered through the observation galleries, watching the delegations interact. She noticed subtle gestures, a flicker of antennae, a change in skin color, a slight tremor in the tentacles. These were signs of emotion, of unspoken thoughts. While alien leaders might argue loudly and formally, their true intentions were revealed in these small, almost invisible signals. She stopped near a group of spindly beings with glowing eyes who were debating quietly. They glanced at her, then back at each other, their whispers urgent. Ilara did not need to understand their words. The tone, the cadence, the hesitation, it all spoke volumes. Humans had a natural ability to read faces and emotions, to notice the details that others overlooked. This was one of her strengths. Returning to the main chamber, she began to speak softly to her aides. Notice who seems anxious, who tries to hide information. That will tell us more than their speeches. Humans survive by watching, listening, and understanding patterns. That is what we must do here. Her advisors nodded, impressed by her clarity. They had expected nervousness, but she moved with quiet confidence. As the summit continued, a technical briefing was presented about the galaxy's energy systems. For centuries, civilizations had relied on a network of interconnected power stations and conduits. A failure in one system could cascade, causing blackouts, resource shortages, and political instability. Ilara listened intently, her mind piecing together the connections that others missed. It became clear that the war had been fueled not only by pride and history, but also by dependence on a fragile network that no one fully controlled. Every faction assumed it could dominate, but none realized that their survival depended on cooperation. This was the key. During a casual break in the chamber, Ilara approached a small group of alien engineers. She asked questions not in a challenging way but with genuine curiosity. If one node fails, she asked, could the rest of the network stabilize itself or would it collapse? The aliens exchanged looks. Collapse is likely, one replied. But it is impossible for us to cooperate fully with rivals. That is why we guard our stations so fiercely. Ilara smiled faintly. What if cooperation didn't mean giving up power? What if it meant sharing knowledge in a way that everyone benefits? The engineers hesitated, then nodded slowly. She could see the wheels turning in their minds. No one had proposed this simple idea before. The galaxy had been trapped in cycles of mistrust, assuming that cooperation meant weakness. Humans, with their fresh perspective, could see solutions others overlooked. Back in the chamber, the formal session resumed. Alien leaders spoke at length, recounting past battles, listing grievances, and proposing minor compromises. Ilara listened, making mental notes. Every argument contained clues, every objection revealed priorities, and every gesture hinted at fears. By the end of the session, she had a map of the political and emotional landscape, more detailed than any chart or briefing. That evening, as the chamber emptied, Ilara walked alone to the viewing gallery. She watched ships depart and arrive, the lights reflecting in her eyes. The galaxy was vast, complex, and unpredictable. Yet she felt a quiet certainty that humans had a role to play, not as warriors, not as conquerors, but as thinkers, observers, and mediators. She pulled out a small datapad and began drafting notes. Listen first, she wrote. Understand second, suggest solutions third. Humans survive not by force but by insight. A faint alarm sounded in the distance. One of the alien factions was late to a meeting, and whispers of impatience traveled through the station. Ilara didn't flinch. She knew that patience, clarity, and calmness were weapons stronger than any fleet of starships. In the quiet moments before sleep, she reflected on the day. Delegates had looked at her with doubt, curiosity, and amusement, but none had realized the quiet storm brewing in her mind. While the galaxy focused on conflict and pride, She had begun to see the threads of a possible peace. Tomorrow she would speak, subtly, carefully, revealing the gaps and connections that others had ignored. She did not need to shout or demand attention. The mere act of listening, understanding, and asking the right questions could shift the balance. Alara lay down in her quarters, looking out at the stars. Humans were small, young, and underestimated, yet within that underestimated form was a mind capable of understanding, uniting, and guiding. She closed her eyes, imagining the summit transformed, the war ending not with weapons but with wisdom. And so, the first day passed in a quiet storm of observation, learning, and preparation. The galaxy continued its cycles of pride and suspicion, unaware that a human princess was already beginning to weave the threads that could bring lasting peace. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, and Princess Alara would take the first steps in a journey that could change the galaxy forever. The second day at the summit station began with a gentle hum as the station's systems adjusted to the rotation of the orbit. Princess Alara awoke before the artificial sun rose, her mind already turning over the events of the previous day. The alien leaders had been formal, proud, and careful, each measuring the other's words as if history itself hung on a single phrase. But Alara had seen the cracks, tiny gaps in understanding, moments of hesitation that spoke louder than speeches. Today, she would begin to act on those insights. The corridor leading to the main chamber was filled with delegates hurrying to their morning briefings. Alara walked slowly, observing. She noticed a small group of insect-like beings moving in formation, their segmented bodies reflecting the light in a precise rhythm. They spoke to each other in rapid clicks, glancing toward the human delegation. She smiled faintly. Every species communicated differently, yet all relied on subtle cues, the same way humans read expressions and gestures. She had spent years practicing this skill, not with aliens but with humans. It was comforting to know that her instincts applied even here. When she arrived, the chamber was already buzzing. Aliens discussed logistics, alliances, and past battles. Alara chose a seat near the center, allowing her to observe everyone without drawing undue attention. She opened her datapad, reviewing notes from the day before. The engineers' hesitation, the leaders' hidden fears, the patterns in their alliances. Humans had learned for centuries that observation was as important as action, and she intended to prove it. The session began with the usual formalities. One of the elder delegates, a being with smooth gray skin and luminous eyes, rose to speak. Its voice resonated through the chamber in a series of musical tones. The war has cost countless resources and lives. Yet, as we meet again, our disputes continue. We must find clarity, or our civilization may collapse along with the energy network that sustains us. Alara nodded slightly. The energy network, she had focused on this yesterday. Every faction depended on it, yet no one trusted the other to maintain it. A simple failure could ignite chaos, but humans had survived fragile systems before, not through dominance but through cooperation and clever management. If she could make the other delegates see that, the war might end without a single weapon being fired. During the morning discussions, the delegates presented reports on their respective territories. Maps lit up the chamber walls, showing lines of energy conduits, resource hubs, and vulnerable stations. Aliens argued over interpretations, each insisting that their own data was most reliable. Alara listened quietly, taking note of the inconsistencies. While each faction tried to maintain an image of control, small errors and contradictions emerged. She scribbled notes in her pad, marking the areas where the factions' assumptions overlapped. At one point, a tall, armored species rose and demanded that control over a critical energy hub be transferred exclusively to their fleet. If humans were in charge, it said, eyes narrowing at her, chaos would ensue. Alara did not react with anger. She waited, letting the statement linger. Then she spoke softly, deliberately. What if, instead of one faction controlling it, each contributed a small team? Humans have successfully managed joint operations in the past. Trust grows when responsibility is shared. It is not weakness to collaborate, it is stability. The chamber fell silent. Few had expected a human to speak with such clarity, and the calm logic of her words made them pause. Some delegates whispered among themselves, the subtle ripples of doubt and curiosity spreading. During the break, Alara moved toward the engineers again. I noticed that each faction fears the other will fail, she said. What if you demonstrated a small cooperative project? A single node managed by mixed teams could prove it works. That way no one gives up power and all gain security. The engineers exchanged glances, hesitation in their gestures. Finally, one nodded slowly. It is risky, but if humans truly believe this can succeed, we may consider a small trial. Alara smiled. Humans did not need to demand obedience. They influenced by thinking clearly, acting gently, and demonstrating success. This was a lesson the galaxy had not yet learned. After the break, the delegates returned to the chamber. Alara watched the insect-like beings and the crystalline species engage in a technical debate over power efficiency. Their discussion was fast and precise, almost incomprehensible to the human ear. Yet the tone, the cadence, and the subtle changes in their posture revealed their true concerns. They feared failure, but they also sought recognition. Alara realized that recognition could be leveraged as a form of incentive. When it was her turn to speak again, she chose her words carefully. Every civilization wants stability. Every leader fears collapse. If we design a cooperative system where each contributes knowledge rather than control, we achieve stability without sacrificing pride. Humans have survived for millennia in fragile systems. We understand how small, careful actions prevent large disasters. The room shifted. Aliens had been arguing over past losses, entrenched in blame and suspicion. Alara's words did not blame anyone. They offered a path forward that appealed to logic, safety, and respect. For the first time, she noticed the leaders leaning slightly forward, listening instead of resisting. During the afternoon, a small incident tested her approach. One faction, a heavily armored group with wide shoulders and deep voices, attempted to claim ownership of a critical relay node for their exclusive use. Their spokesperson approached aggressively, and whispers of anger rippled through the chamber. Alara remained calm. She requested a private audience with the faction's representative, a simple human gesture but one that conveyed respect. In a quiet room, she spoke in a soft, confident voice. I understand your concern. You fear failure and you desire control. But what if we could show that shared responsibility strengthens, rather than weakens, your position? Humans have long survived situations where trust seemed impossible. We rely on understanding and proof, not fear. The representative hesitated. No human had ever spoken this way to them, gently, yet with clarity. They agreed to observe the cooperative trial, a small experiment that could shift the perception of humans from weak observers to practical problem solvers. Returning to the chamber, Alara noticed subtle changes. Delegates whispered in new ways, their postures more open, their gestures less defensive. A few of the younger leaders, inexperienced with interstellar diplomacy, approached her with questions. How do humans manage fragile systems without collapse? One asked. Alara smiled. We listen, we communicate, and we adapt. Systems survive when the people managing them are attentive and flexible. You do not need to dominate to succeed. You need to understand and act carefully. The day wore on with technical briefings, diplomatic discussions, and the occasional interruption from a late-arriving delegate. Through it all, Alara's presence remained calm and steady. She did not dominate conversations with volume or authority. Instead, she influenced subtly, asking questions, pointing out connections, and demonstrating that humans thought differently. By evening, the chamber was quiet. The delegates left to their quarters, pondering the ideas Alara had presented. She walked to the viewing gallery, overlooking the docking bays. Ships moved in intricate patterns, docking and departing in a choreographed dance. For all the pride and suspicion in the room, the galaxy relied on cooperation at its core. That was the key, and she was beginning to show it. She pulled out her datapad again, writing, "Observation first, dialogue second, demonstration third. Humans do not dominate. Humans influence. That is our strength." She paused, reflecting on the day. The alien leaders were stubborn and proud, yet small gestures, careful listening, thoughtful questions, practical demonstrations, had begun to shift their perceptions. Suddenly, an alert flashed across her pad. A rival faction was discussing a subtle challenge to her proposal, seeking to prove that humans were incapable of managing a cooperative trial. Alara did not panic. She knew this would happen. The galaxy was used to proof through confrontation, but she would demonstrate competence without conflict. She drafted a plan. Early tomorrow, the trial node would be activated with a small mixed team of engineers from multiple species, guided by human coordination principles. The goal was simple: maintain stability for 24 hours. Success would not depend on authority, weapons, or threats, but on careful management, communication, and observation. Alara looked out at the stars again, feeling the quiet thrill of possibility. Humans were small, often underestimated, yet here they could prove something greater than military power or intimidation. They could prove that understanding, patience, and cleverness could reshape the galaxy. The day ended with Alara reviewing her notes, preparing for the trial. She understood that tomorrow would be critical. The alien leaders would watch closely. The human delegation's reputation, the possibility of peace, and the credibility of her ideas would all hinge on the results. Yet she felt ready. Humans had always thrived in complex, uncertain situations. The galaxy had assumed they were weak, but strength came in many forms, and today, hers was subtle, quiet, and effective. As the artificial night fell across the station, Princess Alara lay down, staring at the ceiling panel that simulated the starry sky. She imagined the engineers working together, sharing knowledge, and proving that cooperation could succeed. The galaxy would watch, listen, and perhaps begin to see that humans were more than they seemed. Tomorrow, the trial would begin, and with it, a step toward ending a war that no weapon could. Princess Alara felt a quiet determination. Humans might be underestimated, but in their ability to understand, adapt, and collaborate, they held a power that no alien could ignore. And so, the second day closed with anticipation, strategy, and a small but meaningful sense of hope. The galaxy was watching, and a human princess was ready to show that strength was not always in fleets or firepower. It was in thought, patience, and careful action. The next morning, the station hummed with energy. Princess Alara woke before the artificial dawn, her mind already preparing for the cooperative trial she had orchestrated. The small experiment was simple in concept, but monumental in consequence. If it worked, it would prove that humans could guide collaboration without force, and it might sway the stubborn alien factions toward real peace. If it failed, she dared not think of that yet. The chamber designated for the trial was a controlled simulation room, filled with holographic consoles, energy nodes, and control panels from multiple civilizations. Engineers from each faction arrived, some with skeptical glances, others with quiet curiosity. They moved with caution, each guarding their expertise and wary of the unfamiliar methods humans would suggest. Alara stepped forward, her calm presence commanding attention without words. "Today," she said, her voice steady, "we will work together to maintain this node for 24 hours. No one faction is in control. We will share knowledge, monitor carefully, and adapt if needed. If we succeed, we show that cooperation is not weakness but strength." The engineers exchanged glances. Some nodded, some hesitated, but all of them, consciously or not, felt the quiet authority in her statement. Humans were new, yes, but they had a way of seeing the world clearly, calmly, and without ego. The trial began slowly. The energy node required delicate adjustments to maintain balance. Each faction contributed data, monitoring readings and suggestions. Conflicts arose naturally, small disagreements about priorities, about the best approach to stabilize the system. But Alara did not intervene harshly. Instead, she asked questions, clarified misunderstandings, and encouraged engineers to explain their reasoning. At first, progress was uneven. A spike in energy output caused a brief warning, and several engineers tensed, ready to argue or shift control entirely. Alara stepped forward. "Let's pause," she said gently. "We are learning together. What went wrong and how can we adjust without blame?" The room fell quiet. The alien engineers, unaccustomed to such patient questioning, began to explain their thought processes. Alara listened carefully, nodding and making notes. She suggested small adjustments, phrasing them as questions rather than commands. "If we try this approach, do you think it will balance the output?" she asked. Slowly, the energy node stabilized. The engineers looked at each other in surprise. Something remarkable had happened. They had collaborated successfully without a single faction seizing control. Alara smiled faintly. Humans had survived millennia by observing, questioning, and carefully guiding others. She had done the same here, and it was working. Throughout the day, subtle changes occurred. Engineers who had been hostile to human guidance began to share ideas more openly. Those who had doubted the experiment started to see that collaboration did not diminish their influence. It amplified it. Aliens began to recognize that humans had a unique skill: the ability to remain calm under pressure and to translate complex ideas into a form everyone could understand. By mid-afternoon, the chamber was alive with quiet excitement. Alarms had not sounded, the node remained stable, and the teams were communicating effectively. Alara moved among them, asking questions, making gentle suggestions, and letting the engineers take credit for their contributions. Humans rarely sought recognition, they sought results, and that humility was itself a lesson to the alien factions. Word of the trial spread quickly throughout the station. Delegates who were observing from the galleries whispered in disbelief. The young human princess was guiding a coalition of centuries-old factions to cooperate without conflict. Some admitted it aloud, others only muttered quietly to themselves. The perception of humans as weak and inexperienced began to crumble. As evening approached, a minor crisis tested the trial further. A sudden energy surge threatened to destabilize the node. Panic flickered in the eyes of several engineers. Alara stepped forward calmly. "Focus on the data," she said softly. "We have information, we have tools. Let's adjust carefully and observe." She guided them through a series of logical steps. Each adjustment was deliberate, each observation noted. Slowly, the energy spike subsided. The engineers exhaled in relief, exchanging smiles of cautious pride. Alara nodded, knowing that this small success was far more powerful than any speech could be. Proof, not words, was beginning to change minds. Later, as the trial ended successfully, the engineers gathered to discuss their results. They spoke openly, sharing what they had learned, how they had adjusted, and how they had relied on one another. Alara observed silently, recording details, noting the moments when collaboration had triumphed over pride and fear. The alien delegates who had doubted humans approached cautiously. One of the armored species said, "Your methods, they work. Humans think differently. Perhaps there is merit in your approach." Alara nodded politely, careful not to overstate her success. Recognition was not her goal, understanding was. In the quiet of the observation gallery, Alara reflected on the day. The galaxy had assumed humans were weak, fragile, and naive. Yet here they had demonstrated something the older civilizations had forgotten. Patience, empathy, and clear thinking could overcome fear, pride, and suspicion. Strength was not always measured in fleets, weapons, or authority. It was measured in thought, guidance, and collaboration. She reviewed her notes, preparing for the next day. Tomorrow she would speak at the summit, not just about the trial, but about the lessons it revealed. If humans could guide engineers from multiple species to success, perhaps they could guide leaders to peace. She felt a quiet thrill of possibility. Night fell across the station. The stars outside her window sparkled with indifferent brilliance, unaware of the small, human-led experiment that had begun to reshape the galaxy's future. Alara lay in her quarters, imagining the discussions that would follow. She thought of the alien leaders, their pride tempered by curiosity, and she knew that the first real cracks in centuries of conflict were forming. Humans were underestimated, yes, but their ability to observe, understand, and guide without force had begun to change perceptions. Alara smiled. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The trial had proven humans could influence without demanding, collaborate without threatening, and lead without commanding. The galaxy was beginning to see that strength came in many forms, and human strength was subtle, patient, and enduring. As she drifted into sleep, she knew that the journey toward peace was only beginning. The trial had been a success, but the true test would be to translate this small victory into a lasting framework for collaboration. Aliens would resist, pride would flare, and old grievances would surface. Yet she felt ready. Humans had survived countless challenges, and now they would face the galaxy. Alara whispered to herself as if making a promise to the stars, "We are small, but we are capable. We can guide, we can understand, and we can change the future." And in that quiet moment, the first real hope for peace in centuries was born. Not with a weapon, not with a threat, but with observation, patience, and a human voice willing to listen, guide, and inspire. The next morning, the summit station was brighter than usual, although the artificial sun had barely risen. Princess Alara stood quietly in her quarters, reviewing her notes, preparing for the address that could change the fate of the galaxy. The small trial of the energy node had been a success. Engineers from multiple factions had worked together, sharing knowledge and responsibility without a single moment of conflict. That small victory had shifted perceptions quietly but powerfully. Today, she would take the next step. Alara knew that words could carry weight far greater than any demonstration if spoken at the right time, with clarity and calm. The chamber awaited her address. Delegates from dozens of species would be present, many still skeptical of humans, some curious, others quietly dismissive. She adjusted her robe, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that this was not about proving superiority but about showing understanding. The chamber was already filled when she entered. The alien leaders had assembled in their usual seats on the elevated platforms. The engineers who had participated in the trial were also present, standing slightly aside. They glanced at her with quiet respect, their confidence subtly reflecting the success of the experiment. Alara walked to the center of the chamber and paused. She allowed the murmurs to settle before speaking. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice calm but firm, "we have gathered to discuss peace after centuries of conflict. Yesterday and in the trial before that, we have seen a simple truth. Cooperation is possible when understanding guides action." She paused, allowing the words to sink in. Some delegates shifted in their seats, their eyes narrowing slightly, trying to gauge whether a human could truly grasp the complexities of galactic diplomacy. Alara continued, speaking slowly, using clear and direct language. "Humans are young, yes, and some of you may think we are inexperienced, but we have survived countless challenges. We have faced natural disasters, disease, and conflict among ourselves. We have learned that listening, observing, and understanding are sometimes more powerful than weapons. Strength is not always in might. It is in insight and careful action. A ripple of murmurs moved through the chamber. Some delegates exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. Alara did not pause to wait for approval. She continued, carefully weaving a story of human experience. Our history is not unique in the galaxy, she said, but our methods may be. We have learned to cooperate when others doubt us. We have learned to build systems that endure without dominance. Yesterday, you saw a small demonstration of this. Engineers from multiple factions with differing goals and methods worked together to maintain a delicate balance. No one was in control, yet all succeeded. Her words were simple, but they carried power. Aliens had spent centuries assuming that leadership required command, that authority demanded control, and that collaboration would lead to weakness. Alara's speech challenged every assumption. She continued, "This is not just a lesson for engineers or for small trials. It is a lesson for leaders. The galaxy is vast, and the conflicts among us have lasted too long. We have the opportunity to change that, not with fleets or weapons, but with understanding, trust, and shared effort." Some delegates leaned forward, their expressions softening. Pride and suspicion remained, of course, but curiosity was growing. Alara moved carefully, emphasizing collaboration and respect. No species needs to give up its identity or its strengths. Cooperation does not erase power, it amplifies it. When we work together using each other's strengths wisely, we can create stability, security, and prosperity for all. She paused and let the words settle. Then she told a story, one drawn from human history in simple terms. Long ago, humans were divided by continents and oceans. We fought among ourselves, often for resources or land. But eventually, we learned that cooperation brought more benefit than conflict. Trade, sharing knowledge, and communication allowed us to survive and grow stronger. Today, the galaxy faces a similar choice. We can continue fighting, or we can choose understanding. A quiet hush fell over the chamber. For centuries, species had acted on fear and pride. Now, a young human princess spoke with clarity, humility, and authority, showing that another path was possible. The energy of the room shifted subtly. Skepticism was still present, but it was tempered by reflection. Alara knew she needed to make her point undeniable. She gestured toward the engineers who had participated in the trial. "Yesterday, you saw what was possible when different species set aside pride and suspicion. It was not easy, but it succeeded. This small node represents more than technology. It represents our ability to act together. If humans can guide a group of engineers from rival factions to success, surely we can guide leaders to peace." Eyes turned toward the engineers. They nodded in agreement, demonstrating the truth of her words through their quiet confidence. Some delegates whispered to each other, beginning to reconsider old assumptions. Alara's voice remained calm, measured, and patient. Peace is not a gift, it is a choice. It requires courage to trust, wisdom to listen, and patience to act carefully. Humans are young, and our perspective is fresh. But we have learned that understanding others, observing carefully, and acting wisely can achieve what force never could. The war has continued for centuries because of mistrust and fear. We can end it through collaboration and insight. A tall, armored leader shifted uncomfortably. It was a species known for pride and stubbornness. Yet even this delegate seemed moved by the clarity of her reasoning. Others nodded slowly, and quiet discussions began among the factions. For the first time, there was no talk of weaponry, no argument over dominance, no threats veiled in diplomacy. Instead, there was reflection and curiosity. Alara continued, concluding her address with words designed to unify, not to assert. "We do not ask you to surrender your identity. We do not ask you to yield power. We ask only that you consider cooperation, respect, and understanding. If humans, small and underestimated, can demonstrate these principles, perhaps we can all learn together how to end the conflicts that have divided us for so long." Silence followed. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, a delegate rose. It was an elder of the crystalline species, one of the oldest civilizations present. "Your words carry wisdom," it said, voice calm but resonant. "We have dismissed humans as weak. Yet you have shown patience, clarity, and insight. Perhaps there is merit in this approach." One by one, other delegates began to speak. They did not argue, they did not dispute. They acknowledged her points, reflected on the trial, and began to discuss ways to implement cooperative structures across their territories. Some spoke with tentative enthusiasm, others with cautious curiosity, but all spoke in a new spirit. Alara felt a quiet warmth in her chest. This was the moment she had hoped for, not domination, not victory, but understanding. The war had begun to end not through weapons, but through thought, action, and the human voice. Throughout the day, small working groups formed. Delegates began to collaborate, inspired by the principles demonstrated in the trial and reinforced by Alara's speech. Plans were drafted to share knowledge, manage critical systems collectively, and establish protocols for peaceful negotiation. It was still the beginning, but it was a beginning that mattered. Alara walked among the delegates during the discussions, listening quietly, offering gentle guidance when asked, and observing the subtle changes in posture, tone, and attitude. She noticed pride being tempered by curiosity, fear giving way to cautious optimism, and rivalry being replaced by dialogue. These were small victories, but in her mind they were monumental. By the evening, the summit station felt different. The atmosphere was no longer tense with suspicion and pride. There was hope, tentative but real. Delegates who had once doubted humans now spoke of collaboration and the possibility of lasting peace. Alara returned to the observation gallery, gazing at the ships moving in careful patterns across the docking bays. Each ship was a symbol of civilizations that could now choose a new path. She pulled out her datapad and wrote quietly, "Observation and patience lead to understanding. Insight and collaboration create change. Strength is not always force. Today, humans have shown the galaxy a new form of power." Later, as the artificial night settled over the station, Alara reflected on the journey. The war had not ended with weapons or domination. It had ended because someone listened, observed, and spoke with clarity and courage. A human princess had reminded the galaxy of the power of understanding, patience, and gentle guidance. Her thoughts drifted to the future. The road ahead would not be without challenges. Pride would flare, old grudges would resurface, and some would resist the lessons learned. But the seed of change had been planted. Humans had shown that they could guide without force, inspire without demanding, and influence without threatening. That was a form of power no fleet could match. Princess Alara looked out at the stars, a quiet smile on her face. For centuries, the galaxy had assumed humans were weak. Now it knew otherwise. Humans could change minds, build bridges, and shape the future with patience, wisdom, and understanding. And so, as the summit station settled into the artificial night, the war truly began to end. Not with violence, not with fear, but with a voice that spoke for reason, for collaboration, and for hope. The galaxy had listened. And in that listening, humans, small and underestimated, had shown their greatest strength. The war ended when the human princess spoke.